think we should get started. Hi, this is Terry Collins. I am very pleased to welcome everybody to this launch of the report. I'd like to introduce the speakers for today's program. Martina Otto is the head of UNEP's Cities Unit and of the Global ABC Secretariat. Ian Hamilton is professor at the University College London Energy Institute and executive director of the Lancet Countdown on Health and Climate Change. Kanagaraj Ganesan is the cooling expert with the Cool Coalition. He's based in India. We have very honored to have Kate Hughes, director of the International Climate Change Unit of the UK Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, and Paula Valencia, who's executive secretary of the Sustainable Construction Unit in the Ministry of Housing and Urban Planning in Chile. It's now a pleasure to ask Martina Otto to provide some introductory remarks. Martina.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Terry. And thanks to all of you to be with us for this launch of the new edition of the Global Status Report for Buildings and Construction. And maybe if you allow me a couple of words about the Global Alliance for Buildings and Construction, Global ABC. It is an outcome of COP21, the 2015 UN Climate Conference, where the Paris Agreement saw the light of the day. And since then, it has grown to over 190 members, amongst which over 30 countries, and it has become the global platform bringing together governments, private sector, civil society, intergovernmental and international organizations to increase action towards zero emission, efficient and resilient buildings and construction. So it's really a big platform and cutting across all the different players that need to be on board to take action. And our objectives are dual. On the one side, forging a common voice in the sector to overcome the sector fragmentation and to spur radical collaboration between these different stakeholders, and then raising the level of ambition, particularly as the sector has huge, but to date insufficiently tapped potential to bring down the CO2 emission. And what we do is really structured around three main areas: awareness and advocacy. And for example, we've supported the high-level climate champions Race to Zero and the Race to Resilience, including with a call to action to governments called Buildings as a Critical Climate Solution. We work on tools, for example, regional roadmaps that have been put together to provide guidance on, different milestones, targets that can be taken, and really a process as well to engage multi-stakeholders in a given national context. And then, for example, as well, a tool how to better include buildings and construction into nationally determined contributions, which also need to be ratcheted up every 5 years as per the Paris Agreement. And the next round is sort of up for submission. And the third is keeping the sector under review, and that's really the Global Status Report for Buildings and Construction. Should say as well, the Secretariat is hosted within the UN Environment Programme, and that allows us as well to make sound cross-linkages with, for example, work on urban development, multi-level governance, the clean energy transition, resource efficiency, nature, and pollution. And if I may, to add 2 more sentences on the Global Status Report without taking away from the presentation, and here we're really, really happy to have our key authors with us. It's an annual report. Its production does involve a large group of stakeholders to gather information on progress and good practice examples. And it also involves information coming from the International Energy Agency, their modeling. We always also have an in-focus topic. Last year, we did do quite a bit of a highlight on COVID recovery and the opportunities to build back better, and here very literally. And this year we have a spotlight on cooling, given the importance of this issue in light of increasing heat waves. But that comes also with regard to health and well-being of people and the different avenues through which we can get keeping indoor temperatures at a personally comfortable level while minimizing climate impact. And here we look at avoiding the need for mechanical cooling in the first place, to shifting to cleaner alternatives, and to making mechanical cooling as energy efficient as possible. And almost done with my intro remarks. And I mentioned already our work with the two climate champions from Chile and the UK. And we're very, very happy to have both the COP presidency countries, the present and the incoming presidency, with us today. Both are very active Global ABC members and will give us their highlights and insights into their buildings actions as well. And maybe as well a bit of a preview on the second time ever focus with a built environment day at COP, and where we will also have a real estate pavilion that will allow us to focus a bit more on member actions and commitments there. And to close, we keep referring to the sector as the sleeping giant due to its climate impact and the fact that action is lagging behind its potential. And now you will hear that there are signals that this giant is waking up slowly, way too slowly in light of the urgency of climate action. And that goes for both the reducing CO2 emissions due to operations and materials use, but also increasing resilience of our building stock, keeping in mind that a typical building constructed today will be in use in 2070, but facing a very different climate. And that means incremental improvements are not good enough, and we now need the sector to make those giant steps towards sector transformation. And with that, I'm handing over to Ian. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Martina. And it's a really pleasure to be here with you to present the report. As Martina said, it's a real undertaking and a collaborative effort from across the Global ABC membership and our partners. So I'm now going to share a presentation, and we'll lead through some of the key results that we have to tell you about today. So as Martina said, this is the 6th edition of the Global Status Report, and really is there to track the changes that are occurring across the sector and the reactions that are related to the political context, the social context, and in the past year, of course, the pandemic. One of the things that we'd like to make sure is included is a part of that, the drivers, and as comprehensively as possible, drawing from IEA and partner data on CO2 emissions and energy use globally, and looking at the status of policies, finance, and technologies, and how they've been adopted in support of the zero emission, efficient, and resilient building and construction sector. So this year, the report is being compiled together from contributions from ourselves at UCL, the Building Performance Institute of Europe, the International Energy Agency, the World Bank's International Finance Corporation, Cool Coalition, and many others. What's new this year? So some of the things that we've looked at is a 5-year in review. It's been 5 years since Paris Agreement, and it's been along this period, the Marrakesh conference where the Global ABC was set out. And we wanted to know how things have changed within the sector over this period, and I'll highlight those in a moment. We've looked at an update for the Global Carbon Tracker, and this is really important to be able to understand, are we on track towards meeting the Paris Agreement goals for the building construction sector? COVID-19, we've also looked at in terms of stimulus. How has it that the building construction sector and governments have focused their efforts to build back better? We've looked at updates around building codes and how those commitments have been outlined in the nationally determined contributions. We've also looked at changes in the investment levels, what's really needed to be able to take and decarbonize our building stock. We've done a deep dive across a couple of different areas, including the data availability across the globe on being able to track buildings to a detail that's needed, and looking at construction material decarbonization in Europe, and also sustainable cooling, when you'll hear from our colleague Kanagaraj from the Cool Coalition. So how have things changed over the period since Paris Agreement? Well, on one hand, we've seen emissions reduction that have now met a level that hasn't been seen since 2007 from a peak of 2019. But we have to highlight that this has actually occurred in the last year, and primarily as a result of the pandemic. What's happened over this past year is that people have vastly changed the way in which buildings have been used, and workplace settings have shifted from our commercial and workplace settings to home. This has meant that emissions, although have dropped, there is not yet an underlying structural change in the performance of buildings that means that we're actually on our way towards meeting those Paris Agreement targets. Alongside that, we've had an increase in the amount of floor area built across the world, which is a good thing in terms of being able to address the need that people have for buildings, for housing in particular. As Martina would have probably also said, there's a housing crisis across the world that we have to address alongside our climate actions. What we do see as a highlight is that commitments are ongoing. And so we see countries have, in their revised and updated NDCs, made more commitments towards buildings, which we'll highlight in a moment. And the number of countries that have building codes that set minimum requirements for how efficient a building should be have also increased. It's not yet clear that these are yet in line with Paris agreements. In fact, many are not. Lastly, on investment, the level of investment needed to increase energy efficiency across the world has increased quite a lot. But again, this has really been the work of several countries, which we'll highlight in a moment. So overall, during this period, we have both positive and still challenges to address across the sector. When we look at it from our building climate tracker, the figure on the left highlights that once we get to meeting our goal in 2050 would be 100%, let's say. And that inset figure now, you see is quite variable, and it's really sensitive to some of the changes that are occurring, either related to emissions or level of investment or the number of buildings that are being green certified. And these things play an important role. And you can see in this last year that we have far accelerated alongside this trajectory, could give quite a positive view. But when we take out the effect of COVID, we're in fact nowhere near our goals and have reduced from last year. What this means is there's a temporary result, is really just reflecting the unprecedented change of the pandemic. And a lot more actions need to be undertaken, which we'll highlight now. So one of the key messages is really around CO2 emission drop by over 10% from 2019. But this disguises what is still quite a stable demand in the way in which energy use across buildings has been consistent. So what we see is 36% of total fossil fuel energy use is related to buildings. That continues to be the case. And a lot of that related to change in which residential and non-residential buildings have been used in the past year. So there's been a switch. When we look at emissions, however, the drop has largely, as I said, been a result of the pandemic, but in actual fuels being used. And there's been a big fuel shift, particularly among countries and households and businesses that may be vulnerable to fuel insecurity. These are challenges that we need to address going forward, and that size of the wedge needs to continue to draw down. And I'd like to highlight also that the indirect emissions of buildings, i.e. power generation, electricity use, is a major part of that. And the decarbonization of the power sector is really important towards meeting the decarbonization of buildings alongside energy efficiency. Now, the stimulus activities over the past year have really put buildings front and center. And this is really important because across the world, the buildings construction sector account for between 4 to 7% of most economies' gross value add, or GDP. And when we look at the over $445 billion that have been focused in buildings alone, a lot of this is directed towards construction and improving performance and decarbonizations and renewable energy. But this is really important that we continue to see that level of investment going forward, that this isn't a temporary relief mechanism alone. It is good news to see that buildings and energy efficiency investment, which can yield somewhere between 9 to 30 jobs for every $1 million spent, something we highlighted last year, suggests that quite a few jobs has been a part of the stimulus efforts. And when we look at investment, we do see that that overall level has increased by over 11% compared to last year, up to $184 billion. Now, this is really important, and we need to see more of it, particularly as economies begin to rebound and build back their economic activities. But we need to see that align towards the Paris Agreement. And at the moment, this has been dominated by Germany and France in terms of their investment levels. So what we need to see is more building owners and more governments putting in place the mechanisms to support that investment. Well, another area that we wanted to highlight was around building codes. This is the main lever by which we improve over time building performance. And as of September of this year, 22% of all the countries in the world have a mandatory building code, only 22%. And the vast majority of the population growth is going to be occurring in countries that have no building codes today. That means that there isn't yet in place a mandatory lever by which we can continue to improve building emissions reduction. One of the things that we see as a highlight here is that the nationally determined contributions have really put buildings as one of the most important areas, and it's the second most cited activity that countries are going to focus their commitments towards. So this is really positive to view, and what we want to see underneath that is that things like codes, like stimulus, like investments are going to come alongside those commitments. When we look at the coverage across the NDCs, what we also see, unfortunately, is that there is still a number of countries who have not yet identified buildings as being one of the main drivers for emissions reductions. Buildings have the opportunity of not only, of course, meeting environmental emission reduction targets, but as I said before, other sustainable development goals, such as housing, such as livable cities, such as health. They're really critical role to play here. And what we can see in NDCs is as buildings are highlighted and brought forward, that we're able to better account for the changes that we're going to be experiencing. So again, 65% of our projected population growth by 2030 are going to occur among countries that do have a commitment towards buildings performance. Just one more slide from me, and before I hand over to my colleague, to highlight as well in terms of the construction activity themselves, in terms of materials. One of the key things is decarbonizing the material embodied carbon. As we build buildings and the materials we use to refurbish and renovate buildings, it's really critical that those two are decarbonized, and the supply chain being able to accommodate and make use of more renewable energy, more efficient use of resources and lower pollution is really critical. Europe has put in place under the EU Renovation Wave principles that really address that life cycle thinking and approach towards building construction materials. And lastly, just to say that in terms of tracking overall the picture through data, is that at the national level, most countries don't have enough information to be able to help track the changes that we really need to see. And so this is also a call for national governments to invest in that data infrastructure. And I think that maybe this is something which might be highlighted for the UK, who have done this for a number of years and have very strong data resources for tracking these types of activities, as well as other countries. So I think these are the types of things that we want to see going forward. And I'll now hand over to my colleague Kanagaraj from Cool Coalition to walk through the cooling components.
Thank you, Ian. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. So I'm happy to share the highlights of the Spotlight chapter, Sustainable Cooling, which has a focus on space cooling for buildings. So to just give a preamble of this chapter looks at the status and trends of space cooling across the geographies, countries, and programs. It also emphasizes on following best practices related to adopt, improve, shift, and protect strategies for the sustainable cooling actions. And beyond the climate change impact of space cooling, it also discusses the important issues related to access to cooling for vulnerable population, circularity in the material of air conditioning systems, and also the water consumption in the centralized water-cooled air conditioning systems. Coming to the key messages of this chapter, space cooling is one of the major contributors of climate change, primarily due to the high energy consumption, as well as looking at the high global warming potential refrigerant use. So if we look at the year 2020, space cooling is one of the dominant demand for energy consumption, contributing to 1 gigaton of CO2, and which is equivalent to 5% of the total energy consumption worldwide. And in the last 20 years, this energy consumption has increased twofold. And if the respective interventions related to the policies and financial instruments are not in place, then it is expected to grow again by 2 times in the next 2 decades. IEA looks at the possibility of reducing this final energy consumption for space cooling to half by 2050, by following a net zero energy scenario. Next slide, please. Now, if we look at the growth of the room air conditioners in the households, in the last decade, the growth of the air conditioners have been seen majorly in the developing economies, such as India, with a growth rate of 15.7%, Indonesia 13.1%, China and Mexico with 7.9 and 7.8%. And it has been also estimated that by 2050, the total stock which is going to be there for the room air conditioners, 54.5% will come from 3 geographies, that is China, India, and North America. Next slide. This slide, on the left, you can see a map which shows the geographical distribution of cooling dominant countries, which have annual average temperature more than 25 degrees Celsius. If you look at a high level distribution, it constitutes of low income countries, 26 in numbers, 91 countries which are low, middle and middle upper income countries, and 29 upper income countries. So in the lower income countries where the resources for space cooling is less, the country can focus more on urban planning, nature-based solutions, implementation, as well as looking at passive cooling measures. And one can also think about adopting low energy cooling strategies. In the middle income countries, the countries can more emphasize on minimum efficiency performance standards. And as these countries are going to look at rapid urbanization in terms of more buildings coming up, it can also look at adopting building energy codes and the requirements for the passive cooling solutions. On the upper income countries level, the main focus can be dedicated to looking at deep retrofitting of envelope as well as the air conditioning systems, and also looking at digitalizations and adopting high performance standards for air conditioning systems. Next slide. Coming to the key sustainable actions which can be adopted to reduce the environmental impact of space cooling. So this is distinguished into 4 action points. The first one is to look at avoid, which looks at reducing the demand for space cooling itself by adopting solutions related to passive cooling, nature-based solutions, and also reducing the heat gains from the artificial lighting and the equipment in the building. On the improve side, the main emphasis is on selection of right equipment and operate the overall system more efficiently. And also looking at various low energy cooling strategies like evaporative cooling, wherever there are drier climates. On the shift action point, we are primarily looking at utilizing renewable energy and waste heat for air conditioning system, using primarily the vapor absorption system or adsorption systems, as well as looking at the shift towards more climate friendly refrigerants, which have low global warming potential. The 4th action is on protect. So according to Sustainable Energy for All, 1.09 billion people are either rural poor or urban poor, who often live in a poorly designed and maintained housing stock. So for them, it is very important that we should deploy strategies which can shield them from the adverse impact of hot weathers. So with this, I will hand it over to Ian for the final call for actions.
Actually, thank you very much, Kanagaraj. So I'm going to invite a comment from both Kate Hughes and Paula Valencia. But before I do, I just want to say, for the benefit of the media on the phone, on the line, that there will be 2 ways to pose a question to the panel. One is to raise your hand to be unmuted, and the other is to enter a question in the chat box. And we will be prioritizing the media questions, so please include your media affiliation when posing a question. And with that, may I please invite Kate Hughes to offer a comment.
Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for inviting me to join you today, and for all of the work on the status report as well. As you heard earlier, my name is Kate Hughes, and I'm Director for International Climate Change in BEIS. And we're working very hard on COP26, and this report is really good timing. We're just 2 weeks to go until COP, just under, in fact, where the world's focus is going to be on what more we can do to keep 1.5 degrees within reach. We know that we have to be looking across all sectors to deliver this scale of change. And our objectives for COP26 sit across 4 main themes of mitigation, adaptation, finance, and collaboration. And the role of buildings, construction, cooling sit across all 4 of those. And that's why I'm so glad to see the launch of this year's Global Status Report. It's a really vitally important publication to help us track the progress we're seeing in decarbonising our built environment and to hold us to account where we're not making the progress that we need to be doing. We know that by 2050, 68% of the world's population will live in cities, and that buildings and construction will account for just under 40% of global emissions. And we're not going to meet 1.5 degrees without action here. And the world is expected to invest about $90 trillion in infrastructure over the next 15 years. That's more than is in place in our entire current stock today. So there is, as ever, both a huge challenge and a huge opportunity. So the UK is really proud to support the Global ABC in this activity to accelerate international buildings decarbonisation. And we look forward to strengthening our partnership. We see the Global ABC as a centre of gravity for coordinating action for buildings and decarbonisation, and we formally joined earlier this year. As set out in the report, progress on buildings decarbonisation has been too slow, and we've just heard that as well. There's been minimal improvement in energy efficiency and the replacement of fossil fuels over recent years. So at COP26, we hope to showcase the solutions for deep decarbonisation and improved resilience of the built environment, which are both available and being deployed all around the world. These solutions, including fabric efficiency measures, the deployment of clean heating and cooling technologies, the use of low carbon construction materials, can all reduce emissions while also improving the health and quality of life of inhabitants. And this also speaks to the urgency of action. We have the solutions, we just need to deploy them faster and to make them more accessible and affordable. And we're looking at how we can accelerate the breakthroughs needed in these areas of power and energy efficiency, as well as in sectors like steel. And as Ian said, it's really important that we do keep on tracking that progress too, as then we can see where policies are working and where we need to do more. Now, in the UK, our heat and building strategy and actually our net zero strategy have both been published today. And that heat and building strategy sets out how we are planning to drive down the cost of low carbon heating technologies like heat pumps, working with industry to ensure that in the future, they're no more expensive to buy and run for consumers as fossil fuel boilers. And this is about significantly reducing the UK's dependency on fossil fuels and exposure to price spikes as well, while also supporting up to 240,000 jobs across the UK by 2035. So building on these domestic efforts to decarbonise heat and buildings, we're really proud to support the Global ABC's proposal for a new international collaboration on heating decarbonisation activities. This will aim to bring together policymakers and businesses from around the world to share best practice, coordinate approaches, and establish useful networks, all to accelerate that pace of buildings decarbonisation. And we look forward to welcoming other countries into this collaboration. To accelerate the pace of deployment of these solutions, it's important that we make use of all of the skills and the leadership available to us, recognising the vital role of subnational leaders in the private sector, along with national governments too. And it's this message that we hope to deliver during the Cities, Regions and Built Environment Day at COP26. And we're grateful for the Global ABC support in helping us to deliver what we know will be a really exciting agenda. As Martina said, this event doesn't happen every year, but we were clear as the incoming presidency that we needed to shine a light on the progress in this sector, to highlight what is being done and to focus both minds and wallets in this area. So if you're going to be at COP, do come and join us on the 11th of November. And if not, most of the events will be streamed live too. So do watch us and then also join your commitment to ours as well. So I look forward to working with you all in the run up to COP26 and beyond as the UK enters its presidency year and to build on this positive momentum we're seeing around buildings decarbonisation. Thank you very much. And I'm now going to pass over to Paola.
Thank you very much. And thank you for the United Nations Environmental Programme to invite us to this event and to present some words. Well, I want to tell you about the main achievement as Chilean participation got as host of the COP25. I would like to highlight some of them. First, it was recognized that decision-making on climate action had to be based on science. This is a very important achievement. The second, oceans were included for the first time in the global climate action process. The third, commitment was established for the Latin American region to have 70% of energy coverage generated by renewable energies. Also, for us, this is very important because we got this role as presidency. It was very important for Chile because we could mobilize this issue within the country. And finally, Chile commits to carbon neutrality through its NDC 2020, which is being officialized through our national framework law on climate change. This is very important for us. And regarding with the roadmap work that we are doing related with building sector, in order to contribute to the carbonization and resilience of building and city, the Ministry of Housing and Urban Planning, as a leader of this sector in Chile, has promoted several years ago, an intersectoral alliance between public, private, and academic sector. From this collaborative work, a series of initiatives have been developed, and I want to highlight some of them. The first is the sustainability and climate change policy of the Ministry of Housing and Urban Planning, which is focused on 2050. This is policy for the organization in order to have a roadmap for the next 30 years. And this policy responds to a national and international commitment acquired by the Chilean country. The second initiative that I want to highlight is the Cities 2050. This is a multi-sectoral plan and pact whose objective is that planning should be organized from the local government, so the cities respond to the need of their inhabitants and the environmental reality. The third initiative is the National Sustainable Construction Plan for 2050. This instrument will deliver strategic guidelines to achieve and goals to increase sustainability and complete life cycle of building and infrastructure. The fourth is the National Carbon Footprint Strategy from the construction sector, which seeks to define guidelines to achieve net zero emission in the construction life cycle by 2050 through efficient management of operational and embodied carbon. And the last one that I want to highlight is the Ministry of Housing and Urban Planning has participated in the development of the Energy Policy 2050 promoted by the Ministry of Energy of Chile, where it is defined that buildings of Chile will be net zero energy by 2050. So all of these strategies for us are very important because we are developing all together between different institutions. And finally, I want to talk about the measure that I already present are proof that the Chilean government has been making progress in defining impact reduction guidelines and policy for the building and cities sector, understanding that this sector is very critical. Thank you for the opportunity to talk here.
Paula, thank you very much. And I'd like to thank all of our speakers for their contributions. And I'd like to just remind everybody we're about to go to questions. I see we've got a few, but if you have a question, please just raise your hand to be unmuted, or you can enter a question in the chat box. We will be prioritizing media questions, so please include your media affiliation when putting the question. So let's begin then with a question from Rika Melson with Danfoss, one of Global ABC's members, asks, could you explain how the assessment of NDC mitigation topics was done and how you see it, and what should be the key asks before and at COP26 in this light?
Well, I'm happy to tell you a little bit about how it was done. So what a colleague at UCL did was look through the language structure and all the terms that NDCs have a part of them, and this is across multiple languages for which they've been submitted, to look at what commitments have been stated around buildings. So decarbonization, building energy codes, adaptation, and others, and then they've been classified across the NDC set. So that's how we've done it. But actually, probably if I pass over to Martina, or in fact, either Paula or Kate, in terms of the NDCs that they'd like to be seeing coming forward, and especially the ratcheting up, I think is really important that buildings continue to be a major part of what those commitments look like.
Well, thanks very much, Ian, and thanks for the starting point to answering this question, this composite question. And in terms of the key asks, I mean, one of the things that we've said is, even though more countries have submitted a reference to buildings and construction in their NDCs, they're not yet at the level of depth and breadth that is needed to really make the sector move. And that is something that we pointed out in the report, and where it's really good to see an evolution. What we would like to see more of is definitely the building codes, building energy codes, that we mentioned very much as one of the prime policy tools to make that change happen. Something else is also related to procurement, public procurement, for example, as a critical lever. So a number of very concrete steps that could be included going forward as well. And as we say, we want to see the level of ambition every time going up. That should be reflected in there as well. And maybe I stop here and let others come in from their perspectives as well. While we're getting ready, maybe just to say it's the, and I think it came out in the whole presentation already, but it's a real triple strategy, and we do not forget. And that maybe takes us already, I'm sorry, to the next question a little bit as well, in terms of how do we make sure that in the recovery from the pandemic, we lock in some of the positive changes that we may have seen. And it really is a triple strategy. On the one side, looking at energy efficiency in the building, so with deep retrofits, with building in a different way to make sure that we reduce heating and cooling demand in the first place, as we were saying, and make the buildings more fit for the future, as we said as well, some of the resilience perspectives here too. The other one is the embodied carbon. That was for a very long time not sufficiently looked at, but there's huge emissions coming with the material choices and the way we build. And that is to be factored in much more. And as we have seen a little bit of a slowdown in new construction as well at one point, there's a moment to reflect as well. How do we do this going forward? How can we make sure that we make ourselves fit for what we call the circular economy? That we do not only come with new building materials, but that we try and reuse what we can, that we recycle what we can, and that we look at alternative building materials with maybe also some crossovers to other sectors, be it agricultural waste, and try and use that as a modern building material going forward as well. So that's a little bit. And the third is the connection to the energy system. And buildings should not be underestimated, how critical buildings are to help us with the energy transition, to make that happen, not only by reducing demand in the first place, but also by looking at how do we connect with the storage story, where there's a whole range to actually really use the buildings as a critical component in an energy transition, connecting between the energy supply, but also, for example, end users such as transport, and trying to balance things out there. And now I hand over to others. Sorry.
Thank you very much, Martina. Well, unless there are other comments on that question, we have one from Ella Morgan. Asks, what key steps should state actors take to ensure that the positive emission reduction trend remains as we recover from the pandemic? And I wonder, Martina, do you want to begin on that?
I started a little bit on that. As we have seen, I mean, there were real impacts in construction. We couldn't get by some of the construction materials and so on. So that there was a range of things that I started addressing in my previous response. The other one is really we use buildings in a different way at the moment as well, with much more teleworking and so on. There has been a shift as well where energy is being used, and there's an opportunity to dig deeper into those aspects as well. Those would be two sort of immediate. There's a whole behavioral change component that comes in as well. How we behave as users of buildings that can be locked in. And the last one, and that talks back to what we said in the last report, where we had those numbers that between 9 and 30 new jobs are being created for every 1 million invested in energy efficiency retrofits and clean new build. And that's bigger than in many other industry sectors. So how do we make sure that our workforce is actually ready? So there is a bit more of education and training and so on that goes into that to actually help accompany this shift and make sure that we bring the workforce with us as well. So that's my starting point to that. But anybody else? I see Ian smiling.
Sure. Yeah, well, I'll just add, and then maybe pass over. I think one of the things that we've seen over the last year and a half, really, in terms of actions that can have immediate, impacts, is that technology switch that can be undertaken. And so, we can't forget that the vast majority of emissions from buildings are coming from high-income countries that have, a need to refurbish existing buildings. So, putting in place codes and policies for new buildings going forward is critical to do today. And the other thing that we can do today is, for example, deploying things like heat pumps, which enable a far more efficient heating system than, say, traditional gas boilers and the like. And so we're seeing countries, like France, like the UK, phasing out the use of fossil gas appliances to be incentivizing a switch towards electrification and things like heat pumps. Those will have immediate effects, insulating the homes, switching windows, putting up shading, making sure that we're more sensitive to things like heat gains and protect ourselves during heat waves and cold snaps. These are the sorts of things that we can do today and that will have benefits to those of us who, spent a lot more time in our homes over the last year.
I'm happy to come in as well if it helps very briefly, and possibly cutting across both of those questions, because I think one of the really key things that governments can do, that state actors can do as well, is in setting the overall framework and policy direction that sends the signals to the markets, to the investors, to the planners, to communities about the direction of travel. So that's partly in our net zero strategies that we set that give that long-term certainty and so on, but also through the NDCs, which also commit countries to do more, because I think those signals are really important from the state as well. And that cuts across then both the energy sector, which of course is what's driving a lot of the emissions, but also gives particularly the private sector that belief that if they're investing in these technologies, that actually they are pulling in the right direction and those markets are opening up. So yeah, we're very, very keen that the countries that have not yet brought forward updated NDCs do so. I was just checking my latest stats. As of yesterday, we had 121 new NDCs submitted, which covers 148 parties because there's the EU one in there as well. And we've got about 80% of global GDP covered from those net zero commitments as well. So that's a huge kind of move forward. And I think that's really exciting too, in terms of helping to ensure that trend remains as we come out of the pandemic, but also it builds jobs and growth as well. Thanks.
If I can make one point,
yeah.
coming from the Cool Coalition perspective, on the NDC front, we would like to see the mention of cooling as one of the important components for mitigating emissions. So looking at inclusion of passive cooling solutions, and also looking at inclusions of MEPS and building energy codes, which talks about how one can look at improvements in the equipment side would be important. Just want to make one more response to the pandemic part. Mostly in the developing part of the world, the prime focus after pandemic would be to look at indoor air quality. So the ventilation of building becomes quite important, and one need to really see that how we can develop buildings which runs more on a mixed mode rather than a closed system, which is always dependent upon air conditioning system. So really one has to see how we organize that kind of a transition so that we can see that we are on the path towards net zero emissions by 2050. Thanks.
Oh, would you
Also,
like
I
to
want to-
do you have a comment? Yes, please.
Sorry, can I say something very
Yes,
short?
please.
And also, I think it's very important for the governments have this roadmaps and establish goals to improve our energy standard, thermal standard. So another thing that we need in Chile at least to raise more data, objective data about our performance in order to know which could be our real goals and improve the actual data. Thank you.
Excellent. We have time for another couple of questions, I think. First one in the set is the priority actions for, this has been covered, I think, quite well, but priority actions for governments to decarbonize buildings. Unless there's anybody would like to add to what's been said on that point. The other is asking how can the building and construction sector collaborate with the private sector and governments to deliver sustainable cooling for all in buildings and in urban areas. And what are the best practices you've found? Kenna Garage, do you want to begin on that?
Yes. So yes, on the cooling front, it's a partnership between the government policies and how private actors bring the innovations related to the cooling. One of the good technology which is spoken a lot is the district cooling systems. That is something which more on the, I would say, middle income countries, it will become really a boon when we look at more mixed use development and try to see how we can bring efficiencies. So on the private side, again, looking at high performance standards for air conditioning systems and how the whole transition can happen from, let's say, a low inefficient air conditioning system to more efficient way is something which private sector can explore. And another thing which is again important is to look at digitalization of cooling system itself, looking at more state-of-the-art technologies like digital twin, which looks at IoTs and data analytics, and how it can basically even augment government benchmarking of these cooling systems. So there can be always a synergy where the private sector and government can work together and improvise in terms of improving the efficiency of the cooling system and equipment.
If I may add to that, because that was an excellent contribution, but very much focusing on the improved sort of side of things with the performance standards and the air conditioning systems overall. But if we look at it all starts if we talk about the avoid component as well. It even starts with collaboration on the urban planning side, from exposure of buildings, from street trees, and helping to have use wind corridors as much as possible, and so on. There's a whole thing around the thermal performance of the design of the buildings, with how thick the walls are, and so on. So that all goes into the regulation side of things for the entire building. So beyond the energy system, the air conditioning system, and that's where there's a real opportunity as well to, on the one side, innovate, but also to recall what we used to be doing. So some of the traditional ways of building, and modernize that, and bring that back as something that is actually desirable. And I think there's a big cooperation possibility as well between the private sector and governments to actually bring that out, from awareness, from some pilots that people see and touch and feel how that works, to proof of concept in a sense, and really use the market lever of public procurement for that. So if there is a cost issue, that helps bring costs down, but also to make sure that the private sector is really on board. And I think here again, it's this co-creation possibility that comes in, listening to the private sector on some of the technology advances, and how do we use that in our regulation going forward, and thereby make it a bit of a push and a pull. So what is feasible right now, and then have some of those stretch goals embedded, so that private sector really knows what to expect, what to adhere to going forward. So setting out very, very clear targets. And I think we heard that as well, both from Kate and as well as from Paula. Over from my side.
Yeah, please.
Maybe I'll just say something briefly on the innovation in terms of finance as well. What the role there in terms of being able to get money towards this investment. So one of the things that the World Bank IFC contributed this year was outlining some of the innovative ways that real estate investment trusts, these are large global asset owners who are raising funds to be able to direct towards green investment for their buildings. And things like the EU taxonomy coming forward and other innovations in finance are going to help ensure that the money flow, directs towards decarbonization in a very explicit way. So I think that's another way in which businesses can then, have certainty that availability of the financing are going to continue to come through and really incentivize their actions to decarbonize.
Thank you very much. There's one more question. I think we've got time. We've got 5 more minutes before we have to release our panelists, but I wonder if we could just address this. It's roadmaps play an important role for providing the menu of options for governments on potential policy development and implementation. In your view, what are the key steps that need to be taken in order to translate the roadmaps into actual near-term policy change in the country, and what kind of technical assistance can the international expert community offer in this process? And I think, Ian, you actually have a slide that we didn't quite get to, if you wanted to.
Yeah, that's right. Well, just to briefly say, and I'm happy to put it back up just to be able to share, the roadmap strategy that Global ABC built with partners, really highlights to this question, which is both in terms of near-term and longer-term targets, setting out both the policies and the technology actions that can be undertaken. So I think that this question really highlights something which is important, and Paula probably as well to come in, and Kate as well, in terms of how they construct these roadmaps such that they're directly feeding back to a set of actions and really targeted towards the stakeholders that need to put in place this set of requirements, or basically kind of the pathway. And I think the main thing here is that the path that countries will take will differ, but the destination is the same. We need to see a decarbonized building stock by 2050, and prior to that, by 2030, operational building emissions for all new buildings to be net zero as well. But I'm happy to hand over to others to comment.
I want to tell something. For us as a country, we developed, as you saw, several strategies, and it was a very challenge for us, mainly because we need that different actors compromise different goals or actions. So in order to get these changes in the industry, we need to work all together, not only one institution. So for us, the roadmaps are very strategic because we can push other institutions to do things together with us, not only us. So this is for us very, very important thing in this, in the roadmaps.
Thank you. And just a very quick word from me too. I mean, I think it's probably just worth signaling that, I mean, one of the key things that we think will help countries and partners work together and to collaborate is by joining the Global ABC and being part of this kind of group that is sharing best practice and ideas and, you know, what works and what doesn't and so on. And it's by you know, learning from other people, from other countries, from other progress and other technologies and so on, that we'll all be able to accelerate what we are doing. And then there's a whole lot of kind of technical assistance out in the world as well that we know we're really proud to support, like the NDC partnership, which absolutely is working with countries on their own path, on their own targets, and helping to access the support that those countries need. On the energy side, we've got our Energy Transition Council, which with a number of focus countries is doing similar things as well. So there is a range of support out there in order to support this, including also on the finance side as well. And I think linking up the finance conversation, if you like, the sort of the climate conversation is critically important here, and making sure we're all talking that same language across that divide. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, I apologize if we didn't get to your question, but I think we have to bring it to a close here. And I just want to conclude with a couple of things. One is that there will be a recording of this past hour that will be on the event page, and I will put the email address, my email address, in the chat box if anybody would like to get that URL or a copy of the recording. And so I think it's been a very helpful past hour, and I just want to thank our speakers, Martina Otto, Ian Hamilton, Ken Garage, Ganesan, Kate Hughes, Paula Valencia, and thank you very much to all.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.